Hello and welcome to this stock analysis update for British American Tobacco. Before I start, please remember that I do these videos just for fun as a hobby and always speak to a financial professional advisor before making any investment decisions. So British American Tobacco are the world's largest tobacco company. 90% of the world population still smokes, but they're obviously feeling a lot of pressure from the reduction in smoking, particularly in the West. They currently pay around an 8.9% dividend yield by my calculations, and they've got quite a large free cash flow with them able to do 2 billion of share buybacks in 2022. But they also have about 38 billion of net debt, and they have promised that they're going to switch from the share buybacks to paying off debt. But that is a large amount of debt, particularly given the situation we're in these days where it's getting more and more expensive to borrow money. So something that's new for 2023 is they've restructured so that now they have three areas of operation: the USA, Americas and Europe, and Asia Pacific, Middle East and Africa. So they did this to try and streamline the business in 2023. And as you can see, the vast majority of their sales are in combustibles. And here you can see they own a lot of the premium smoking brands. Snuff is still a thing in the US, but the main narrative for this stock is that their combustibles sales are over time are falling as less and less people smoke, and so they're trying to replace that with the next generation products. And these are the modern oral, the thermal heat products, and the vaping products. And you can see here how with their vaping and thermal heat products in particular, they're trying to transform the business so that eventually it'll be mostly vaping. The sales are 44% in the US, but the other two regions account then for 35% and 21%. So this does offer them some protection if they get under attack, particularly in the US, which they have been with government legislation and things. This can provide them some protection, and also the trends of smoking are different in the different parts of the world. So in terms of revenue growth, it looks like based on their interims, they're going to have about 2% of revenue growth in 2023, with 40% for vaping and 11% T8 thermal heat products and 42% up for their chews. So extremely strong revenue growth here across all categories apart from snuff. If we focus just on the interims for the US, we see that in the USA, and in fact in all regions, combustibles still dominates. But in the US, the non-smoking stuff is just vaping and snuff. It's interesting that the thermal heat products don't seem to feature in the US. So in the US, their revenues were 5% down overall, with a horrific number of negative 12% volume growth in the US. Snuff was down, but it's not really that much of the pie, and vaping was down 7%. Now, they managed to achieve 23% revenue growth for the vaping, but they lost out by 7%. So that is fairly horrific because we want most of our growth really has to be in the US and vaping in the US particularly. So that is quite worrying. Now in the US, their sales really are under attack in several areas. So for cigarettes, lots of states keep banning the use of menthol in cigarettes. So that's been hurting them. And then in vaping, they said that they're up against illicit vapes that are being sold in the newsagents alongside their products. Whatever the reason, that is a risk to an important area of growth for them. So Americas and Europe, Here they've cleverly lumped the Latin American countries with Canada and Europe. And of course, whilst in Europe we see a lot of the cigarette decline, I am a little bit curious if in Latin America there's been lots of more smoking of combustibles, particularly because this part of the world's becoming more affluent. So there's more people with lots of money able to afford the premium brands now, which are seen as a status symbol. But all the same, we've got 9% revenue growth overall, with cigarette growth up 2% by volume, and the vaping, and that will be mostly Europe, up 29%, 57% in terms of revenue, and thermal heat products up as well, and that will also be mostly in Europe. So actually, the Americas and Europe on its own, a very well performing regional segment, and its revenue now at 4.7 billion is catching up with that of the US. So it does this does help the company a lot actually achieve the results it did achieve. So then we have Asia Pacific, Middle East, and Africa, and here we see really the only thing other combustibles that's having a big effect is the thermal heat products, and I believe that a lot of that's in Japan actually. And here we can see when we look at the revenues, really cigarettes are the only one of major significance, but the cigarette revenue growth was up 9%, even though the volume growth was down 10%. So the overall picture here is their geographic mix is helping them a lot. I'm worried about the vaping situation in the US, but generally they've really pulled it out the bag again in terms of their revenues across all their products. But we are perhaps just worrying about the volumes, particularly the US. So focus on vaping. And actually, I went to my local supermarket the other day and took this photo. And here you can see the British American tobacco products. They're the Views and the Views Go. And then here in the middle or on the left, here on the left, we see the main competitors, and that's the Elf bars and then the Lost Marys. And they have very distinctive product designs. And the thing is, these have been completely wiping the floor of everyone. Really, a vast amount of the sales to young people have been these products. And you can actually notice here, you'll see how the Elf bars, the shelves almost completely clear, and the and some of the Lost Marys are clear, whereas actually most of the Views products are still stocked. So that does show you how popular these competitors are. Now, about 4 or 5 months ago, the Views products were actually less puffs per product. So currently, with an Elf bar or a Lost Mary, you get 600 puffs, so that's 600 inhalations. Whereas with the Views products before, you only used to get 500. So not only were people not smoking the Views products because they didn't taste as good, but because you didn't get as much. Well, I've noticed that they've now upped the Views product to 700 puffs or 700 inhalations, and the Views Go are actually 800. Plus they've actually changed the flavors, and I've been testing these, and the flavors are definitely tastier, although probably not as good as these products, but they still are at least now getting there. And so with their kind of branding here, and I would say they've got you can tell that this isn't their first rodeo when you look at how effective this packaging is. I am actually fairly impressed now that in contrast to a good 5 or 6 months ago, where I really was worried about views getting any traction at all, they do impress me as they're giving it a good go when I look at it now, particularly with how they've got more puffs per product than the competitor here. So that's just some real world intel I thought I'd share with you. And we look at the vaping here, the vaping data here, and actually, I should say, what I just showed you there was for the UK. It's a very different situation in rest of Europe and in America because the regulations are different in those places. But here we go to global vape volumes. And on the one hand, it looks like it could be plateauing. And if in the next few years this plateauing is confirmed, that would be very, very bad, I think, for BAT. However, it is still actually within this. It is actually still within this trend that I've drawn. It could tick up next year and still be in trend. So we're at a pivotal moment here where it's either going to plateau, and that's big trouble, or stay in trend. The the thermal heat products are again in this same actually trend as with the vaping, where they seem to have plateaued. Is this a plateau or are they still in trend? The modern oral products, they're clearly still ramping up really nicely. You can see though that they're only really significant in Europe. And the smoking, we still see the cigarette volume dropping. There was a 3% decline reported, and it's this is just steadily erodes British American Tobacco's revenues, but they managed to sell the cigarettes for more, so it doesn't affect them too much overall. Plus, we do seem to still have growth in some regions, so it's a bit of a mixed bag actually. And I do wonder if will there become a point, will they get to a point where the number of people smoking cigarettes stays stabilizes. I wonder if that's possible. I think in the US, the way that the smoking of cannabis has been supported there by the government, that smoking cannabis, I do believe then leads to people smoking cigarettes, and then you do seem to get a proportion of young people who choose to smoke despite all the information. So yeah, it could. I do wonder if it will reach a kind of, it will bed down eventually. I'm not sure. At least you can say in the long run here, in terms of cigarette volume in billion sticks they sell, at least the decline is fairly is at least the decline is fairly constant. It's not like it's roller coasting out of control. So this does give them some chance to move into the new areas in order to replace the lost revenues. So in terms of news items since 2022, and also since the last video I did, they obviously did the reduction into 3 regional divisions. They've actually now been hit with the 0.6 billion fine for evading sanctions to North Korea. But what I should point out is that this is something that happened many, many years ago. So although they're getting hit by it now, that is included in the impairments, and the current management aren't really responsible for that. However, actually, there was some big news in 2023 in that their CEO, who'd only just come in 2018, he's now been replaced with a new CEO, Tadou Morocco. So perhaps that was pressure because of the share price just hasn't it's really done much in the last couple of years, but it's hard to know what's going on there, and I guess a change of CEO is probably a sign that things aren't good. So just taking a quick look at the interims, they say that they're going to reach new category profitability by 2024. So that's actually a year earlier than planned. Also, they had to spend $500 million of capex, and a lot of that is in these new category areas. So we've got to remember that this transformation the business is going through, it's costing them a lot of money to do that. Yeah, global volume was down 3% in terms of cigarettes. They've got a stated 2 to 3 times adjusted net debt to adjusted EBITDA corridor in terms of their leverage. That for me is a nasty debt profile. I don't care which company it is. So here they highlight how in the US, more than 50% of the total vapor market are these illicit synthetic nicotine disposables. And they're hopeful that the FDA are going to crack down on this. So we'll see. They're basically under a lot of duress in the US, and here's the reason. So you could look at that as a big warning sign for this stock. And then in the longer run, if the FDA do crack down, however, that then creates a bit of a moat for British American Tobacco, but this is still very much in play. So I'm so disappointed when I see them mention and tease us about their Beyond Nicotine, and they talk here about a 10 million investment in Charlotte's Web, which is some kind of joint venture they have. But this is their biotech tobacco stuff. But you can go and look. Well, I go into a lot of detail in that in my earlier videos on this company. So go and look at them if you're interested. But it's just pathetic to only be spending 10 million. They're just teasing us, but never doing anything. And worse than that is the CBD. There's just no traction with their CBD products, and for me, I don't think there could be any way better of diversifying their profits than moving into CBD products and even cannabis products. But they tease us, but they don't deliver. So basically, forget it as in case of any future growth from those kind of things. They've been teasing us for too many annual reports now, and I think they're a write-off in that regard, and that really does disappoint me as a shareholder. It's interesting how they have this ITC Limited, and this is a company, this is a joint venture in India, and that comes on there as an income on their balance sheet under joint ventures, and it's been going really well. It's up 0.1 billion to 0.3 billion now. I believe that must be interim results, and so I really like it how they're in India. I think India is the new China, only it's a democracy, so it's going to be twice as good. And it's great that British American Tobacco are there, and it'll be nice seeing this part of the balance sheet totting up in the future, thanks to their investment in India. When we look at the net income history, we have here an extremely robust, reliable set of revenue numbers every year, and a nice, reliable net income every year, and that's despite all the disruptions of COVID and since then. So, in terms of its net income history, you've got to really hand it to British American Tobacco. They've done an incredible job. You'll see that here as well. And actually, the 2023 interims with 4% increase in revenue, and I couldn't really quite work it out, but also very good operating profit and net income it appears, it does seem that this trend's only continuing. And so this is something you've really got to give credit to British American Tobacco, is that they continue coming out with really good financial results. We can see here, though, how combustibles are still the vast majority of those sales, with the new categories now starting to make some contribution. When I look at the revenue by geography, we see here the newly created regions are now one dot because there's only one data point. So there's Europe and North Africa, there's Americas and Europe, and Asia Pacific, Middle East, and Africa. And we see the US sales do seem to have dropped though from 2022, and this is where we've been very fortunate to have a boost in the rest of the world to overall create this kind of miracle where British American Tobacco really do just keep up coming up with the goods in terms of their raw numbers, despite everything that's been thrown at them. So I found it kind of difficult to tease out the net income numbers, but it the thing is, the second half and first half of the year, there's always quite, it can be lumpy. So, but it does appear that they're going to come out with some really nice net income, perhaps record breaking net income and operating profit at the end of the year. So the bare numbers are extremely good, and that's the strange thing. We've had, despite the cut in volumes, they're able to sell the cigarettes for a higher price. And then, so despite everything that's thrown at them, these are really solid numbers. Got to hand it to them. They're doing an incredible job. Now, the assets, go and look at some of my earlier videos where I go into the different line items in loads of detail. But this is an update video, and I'll just, there's not really too much to report about in terms of changes to the assets. In terms of the debt, the only thing I'll point out is that they still have 37 billion of long-term debt, which I really don't like. But as I said, they have promised that they're going to start focusing on reducing their long-term debt. But it's about time. One thing that worries me about British American Tobacco is that actually the majority of their assets are intangible assets. And when I looked into it, a lot of that is related to their branding and owning the cigarette brands. Now, I find that a bit worrying because I don't think cigarette brands. I wonder how long are these cigarette brands really going to be worth much? And that is something I pointed out before, so I'll quickly point that out again. They have about 37 billion of long-term debt, and obviously I really don't like that. And they've promised that they're going to start concentrating on reducing their debt rather than doing share buybacks. I've got my visualization I do where we have their market cap up against their net assets, and we can see that obviously their market cap is still hiding behind their net assets, and that means a price to book of 0.8. So they really are fundamentally rather undervalued. Now, obviously, tobacco stocks are always have lower price to book and lower price to earning ratios, but still, it seems even more extreme of recent times. Really, with British American Tobacco, it's all about, are they going to be able to make up the combustibles, the losses, make up the losses in combustibles with an increase mainly in the vaping. And here's that same graphic. And here I've got the data for 3 years, starting in 2021. And we see that the actual growth from 2021 to 2022 did seem kind of reasonably fast enough. But when we go from 2022 to 2023, I'm a little uncomfortable with that increase. As you can see, it's only a tiny slice of increased revenues. So it's a little bit concerning to me that they are going to be able to continue to grow the vaping enough to replace the losses in combustibles. However, there is perhaps a counter argument that several other things could happen. So, maybe the losses of sales in combustibles starts to bed down. And the other thing is that, of course, maybe their sales in some parts of the world will keep on, they're actually going up. So, they could end up, that really could help the stop of the shrinkage of their combustibles revenues. So it's important to point that out. But for me, it's definitely a niggle that I would actually like to see the vaping revenues increase faster than they are. So here I've got the tobacco sector. This here is when I got in, which was around here on the 5-year chart. Of course, I sold half of my position in March this year, so that helped reduce my losses quite a bit. And what I've done is I've set a stop loss here, which is below where technically you'd expect maybe a bottom. I didn't really like being in this, but I set a stop loss normally rather than just exiting. And the losses, when you think of the dividends I've had, the losses probably aren't that bad actually overall. But here I am anyway. And it's just interesting though that compared with last time I looked, there just seemed to be maybe a bit of a bottom form. When you visually, when I compare it now, actually here for me technically, and remember I'm not an expert, but this is just my own best guesstimate here. But for me anyway, technically, we're either in a nice bottom here that we could trundle along for some while, or, and particularly bear in mind that I'm expecting the US, the UK, and a lot of the world to go into recession maybe late this year, early next year. Um, you know, Perhaps the tobacco stocks will act defensively, and then this would form a nice bottom meeting that narrative, or perhaps they'll crash with all the other stocks, in which case we'll continue to plummet down here. But either way, that puts us at a good intersect here, a good moment in time where we're either going to see some stability to the tobacco sector or it continue to plummet. That's what I see when I look at this sector chart, and it it kind of looks right on the long term as well. Either of those two scenarios playing out, which all times really well to where we are in the macro environment at the moment. Actually, historically, when we had the dot-com bubble and credit crisis, tobacco stocks did seem to do well, particularly the dot-com bubble. With the C9, with the COVID-19 though, we saw a crash in tobacco stocks just as much as with everything else. So I wouldn't really say with loads of confidence that in a stock market crash, tobacco stocks do this or do that. I'm not kind of I'm not quite confident in saying that from the historical data, but certainly in some cases, particularly dot-com bubble, they did very well. Now, actually, this is an interim update, and so I'm not going to bother to do the cash flow. You can go and look at my last video where I did the cash flow analysis. In terms of shareholders, there was actually some shares sold by their biggest shareholder, the Capital Group, but I'm unsure whether that's just random noise or not when I look at the difference from 2022. Otherwise, nothing really to shout home about. Please bear in mind, though, that because of the vast size of this company, a lot of the people buying and selling shares are under the radar. So my verdict's definitely to hold British American Tobacco. I've got my stop loss there. And when I look at the all-important sector charts, it does seem to be a nice intersect now between the two possibilities of perhaps perhaps a recession and it goes crashing right down, or perhaps a recession and it, as a defensive stock, it kind of bobbles along here. So I'm quite happy with my setup and with my stop loss for my situation. And of course, whether you buy or sell, that depends on your own situation at the moment, and that's why you speak to a financial advisor. They keep on coming up with absolutely amazing results, just so robust results. It's been encouraging seeing increasing sales outside of the US, and it's impressive how they're able to achieve greater revenues from the smoking. But then you've got to weigh that against this unfortunate results in the US. I've also got a question mark about how they're valuing their assets, particularly all these cigarette brands. And I kind of myself, I'm a little bit uncomfortable about that because I think that smoking brands perhaps are becoming a bit unfashionable. So overall, though, it's a hold for me. It really is amazing how, despite everything thrown at them, they've continued to come up with these great results. But if that was to stop, that's a warning sign for me. Obviously, you've got to keep an eye on the cigarette volume decline, and also the vaping growth has to continue. We've got to keep a good eye on that. And also the debt. They have a lot of debt, and is that going to start hurting in the current environment of high interest rates? So that completes my stock analysis update for British American Tobacco. I hope you found this useful and look forward to seeing you at the next video. Please read the disclaimer and remember that prices can go down as well as up.